Hiya, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to do gradient effect text in Bubble. First thing I'm going to show you how to do it the static way, where you just type it into the editor, but then I'm also going to show you how to do it the dynamic way. This means you can allow your users to type text into an input and specify which words they want to have as gradient text. So they might be doing it on a landing page, they might be doing it on their profile or on a dashboard or something like that. So I'm going to show you both ways of doing gradient text. So here we are in the Bubble editor, and to start with, the basic gradient text is here. So rather than using a text element, which you would normally add to the page if you want to do text, I have used an HTML element because this allows you to actually type HTML in. And if I click on that, you will see that we have some CSS styling information here. So everything between the opening style tag here and the closing style tag here, this is all CSS styling, which is then being applied to the actual text down here. So if you look here, you can see it says gradient text is, and then it says span class equals gradient text. Then it has the word awesome, and then it has a closing span. So if you don't know what all this syntax is, this is all HTML, and I highly recommend doing some beginner HTML and CSS tutorials online because it's just super useful to know for small things like this. But to explain it, essentially what we're saying here is we are creating a div, which is pretty much the same as a group. It's a kind of container, and we are applying a certain style class to that group. And the style class, we've given the name header-text. And then up here, within these style tags, where we have this little dot here, that means it is a style class, and we've given it the same name there, header-text. So this text here, because it is within this div, and you can see the closing div here, so everything within that is going to have this header text applied to it. So this style here, it just says font family, inter, font size, font weight, color, text align, and so on. You can add or remove as many things as you want from here. You can change them around, or you can copy them from elsewhere. Then surrounding the word awesome, we have this thing called a span. And a span is also a type of container, but unlike a div, which usually stacks one on top of another. So if we change this to a div, the word awesome would be below the word gradient text is. A span allows you to do a container within a container, and it doesn't break to a new line. So in this case, we want to use a span, and this span, we are using the same syntax that we did here. We are saying class equals, and here we have gradient-text, and then we have the closing span just after the word awesome. So if we look up here in our styles, dot gradient-text, that's the gradient text class, we have all of these different styles applied to it. So we have a background color, but we also have a background image, which is a linear gradient, and then we have the two different colors and the angle of the gradient here. So although all of this stuff looks very technical, if you Google how do I do gradient text with CSS, you'll basically be able to copy and paste all of this, and then you'll just have to update the colors that you want in the gradient using hex codes like these, which you can find on any kind of color generator website. So that's really it. If you want to have static text which has a gradient applied to some or all of it, you just need to use an HTML element. You add the styling that you want your text to have here, and then you actually have the text here, and you apply the styling using these classes. But what if you want your user to be able to create gradient text, and obviously your user is not going to have access to the editor of your app, so they won't be able to type it in here and put in all these HTML classes and so on. Well, in that case, you do what I've done here. So in HTML-B, this is the dynamic gradient text, and everything here is the same. All of the styles are exactly the same. Down here, this is the same, div class equals header text, and then the closing div. The only difference is, instead of having the actual words here like hard coded into the back end, we have it referencing input A, which is just an input I put up here. So we have it referencing input A's value, and then we have two find and replace operators. So the first find and replace looks for an opening square bracket, and it replaces it with the HTML that we had in our earlier example. So it's span class equals gradient text, all surrounded by these pointy brackets. And then the second find and replace looks for the closing square bracket, and replaces it with the closing span HTML tag. So hopefully you can see that all we're doing here is exactly what we had here, where we had span class equals gradient text and then the closing span tag, except we are using find and replace to say look for the opening and closing square brackets and replace them with the appropriate HTML tags. So what that means is our user could decide to put square brackets anywhere they want. And we know that this HTML element here is going to replace the opening and closing square brackets with the appropriate span tags, which will then tell the browser that this word should have a gradient class applied to it. And one final tip is that you don't have to keep these colors as static colors that you've hard coded on the back end. You could have a color picker that allows the user to select the starting and ending colors of their gradient, because you can of course insert dynamic data to this field here. You could also make this number here dynamic as well so that they can specify the angle of their gradient. You could actually use dynamic data to replace any of these fields and allow your users to update the HTML from the user interface of the app, as long as you just make sure they get the syntax exactly right, because with this we are dabbling in the world of code and we know that code insists on syntax being correct. So that's all for this tutorial. I hope it was useful, and happy building.